Okay, so last week I posted, I'm going to buy a Division I football program. And I got a lot of comments and calls and texts around, what the heck are you talking about? And I promised an update, and so here it is. The short of it is, over the last year, I've had significant progress in the actual acquisition of a Division I program. Now, before I get into any detail, I have got to be really honest. I can't go into too much. I can't tell too much for obvious reasons. This deal is not closed and there's still a long way to go. I just thought that it's such a unique and interesting experience, story, transaction, potential, a lot of different parts, a lot of different people involved that I would jump on and say what I could. I've been in a somewhat of a broker role in this transaction over the last year. And so I have a unique seat at the table and wanted to at least share some information about it. A year ago, I had an idea, a concept that has materialized and taken different shapes and form over the last several months that I thought we've shown enough progress here where, talking about it makes sense, at least to me. Let's rewind a little bit, which several years ago, I noticed change of the guard as it relates to the haves and the have-nots of college athletics, mostly because schools with big brand, big donor relationships, heavy money and resources would be able to get facilities and players at a level that was very different maybe when I played or even before that. So as we've seen over the last several years, the eyeballs and the dollars from the networks to the universities to even the players, those things have significantly changed. And I think from a small school perspective, I started to realize, man, that feels like me with regards to business. Like, how do you stay small and compete with these billion-dollar enterprises? And my solution was, you bring in a big equity investment. And my original thesis and thought around this was sell the football program, strip it out, sell it independently, and create a commercial entity that can be the financial and the economics can be considered on their own. It could also be run independent of an athletic department, which sometimes has larger constraints, especially in the smaller school systems. That was the original intent and idea. Again, I don't know if exactly what a transaction would materialize into as far as structure, but we're at the point now where the first part of my journey was to present it to the university. That meeting was in front of the university president and the athletic director. And to be quite honest with you, I thought that was going to be met with a lot of head shaking and more no's than yeses. And to my surprise, it was actually met with a lot of questions and curiosity. And from that point, about 7-8 months ago until today, it's been more of the same, including the school's legal department, the conference, and then several different M&A attorneys and even attorneys that specialize in college athletics. And so as I sit in my seat and look at the different people and parties that are participating in a transaction like this, I'm extremely optimistic and motivated to get a deal done, because I think this is one way and a means for a smaller school to be competitive. And when I say competitive, I don't mean that they're going to be able to raise enough money by the sale of this new entity or setup to compete with the Alabama's, at least dollar for dollar economically. But it's a way where we just bridge that gap. And I think in bridging that gap, if you bring in money from either a private equity or venture capital type of investment, there's some strategy around it. So when it comes to ticket sales and merchandising, and there's additional opportunities for sponsorships and how you market and brand the team, I think there's again, just a ton of opportunities because there's a ton of eyeballs. I think people are really interested in college athletics, and live entertainment has been soaring over the last several years, and that doesn't seem to be slowing down. So there's just a lot of interest in college football, college basketball, and college sports in general. So again, the update here is that it is a complicated deal. It is further down the path, and I think a lot of people, I think there's some opportunity with First Mover being one of the first colleges to actually do a transaction and get it to the finish line. I think there's value and benefit to that from an economic standpoint in several different areas. I think there's a lot of complexity as it relates to approval, both at the university level as well as the conference level. That there's still some headway to be had as it relates to that. And structure-wise, I think there's some flexibility, but not a lot, because you're dealing with a university and in a system underneath a conference that I think still a lot to work through. So where it sits today, it is going. There's a couple of investors that have made verbal offers. There's a review process at the university level that is happening currently. If that goes well, it gets presented to the conference. Then there's a bunch of lawyers that would need to figure it out from how you paper it up. And then from there, it could progress fairly quickly. So again, there's still a lot to be determined. Like I said, these deals have a lot of different people and parties, and anytime you get a room full of attorneys on multiple different sides, it becomes more complex than most people would have the patience for. So again, really fun deal. It's a really exciting time. I think that this is one way. There's probably others. This is one solution that I thought of a year ago, and I'm just really excited that we've progressed to the point where I'm able to sit here and really talk about it. And again, I hate talking about a deal before it's inked and done. There's still a lot of things that have to happen for there to be success and a successful outcome for everybody here, but certainly learned a lot through this process and excited about next steps. I will update when I can and as I am allowed to, especially with a bunch of attorneys watching. So anyway, cheers everybody. Thanks. I wanted to jump on here and answer a couple of questions I got multiple different times over the last several days. So one was, are you buying the program yourself? Well, I certainly wish I had that type of bankroll. I am not. Like I said, I'm more of a broker relationship in this, and will be, if this does go through, will hopefully be a board member of the final transaction. So I will participate in the economics. I will not be the only participant for the purposes of how big the numbers are. But playing a role, being both a strategic and economic participant would be something that I'm definitely interested in. So I will be buying a part, but not the whole thing. So hope that answers that. The other question I got, or one of the other questions that I got, was how soon would you think that this deal could transact? I would say on the optimistic side, by the end of the year. Again, it's hard to really say in a deal like this because of a lot of different people and a lot of different approvals that would have to be signed off on. But optimistically, I think end of year would be a win for the university. Again, the reality of going into another season and what an economic windfall would mean for in the short term for both players and other resources that would be able to be funded through an equity investment like this. So end of year on the short end of it, and then it could take another, who knows, year to year and a half on the further end. I think after that people lose interest. So if it doesn't happen within that time frame, I think there's a lot of people have other stuff going on. And another thing that I got asked was, if someone were to make an investment, how and what would they be investing in, and how the heck do they get their money out? This is an interesting one because this comes into deal structure. And I'll say this, and I'll speak in very general terms because there's no deal that is signed off or agreed upon at this point. And there's, in any transaction, or any type of deal, there's always tens, if not hundreds of ways to stand a deal up and to actually execute. So I want to say there's a possibility of a lot of different things. I think the way an ideal scenario would play out would be a smaller school, meaning not one of the Power 5 or Power 4, one of those types of schools would set up a commercial entity and would sell a percentage for a certain dollar amount. That would be in exchange for control over certain things, meaning how you put butts in the seats for games, what other revenue generating opportunities there are through marketing, sponsorships. There's also, game day and merchandising experience, things that have revenue attached to them. So there's a lot of different areas as far as creating structure and systems around what it could potentially mean for a smaller school. So you bring in expertise, and that expertise would yield dollars and cents. So while I don't know exactly what a final deal would look like as far as structure, there's going to be certain things that both the university and the conference are going to require if a deal were to ever materialize. But from there, I think it's, again, a negotiating point. Okay, another question that I got asked was how, and I think I brought this up last, but how would someone who comes in as an investor, how would they get their money out? This is another interesting one. And again, not to get into too much of the specifics, but my original idea was to create an entity, have there be some sort of acquisition, again, a certain price point and a certain percentage. And then that entity would potentially be able to tokenize. And my whole concept around that a year ago was to do that all in the first tranche of money. What I've realized is that it was so complicated to figure out a deal just from the standpoint of creating a separate entity and what that entity had or what value it had, that to do the tokenization of that asset all in the same transaction, I think people's brains were about to explode. So I've realized that my ambition and my excitement over a deal doesn't necessarily equal what the university conference or legal teams also have. So there's some level of rational thought that came into play here. And so my idea of tokenizing a football team and then selling that to the public is still something that I think would be round two of a deal, and that any investor who comes in and brings significant money, a way for them to get their money out would be to sell in a public sort of market. And again, that's probably a post in and of itself, and I'll tackle that some other time. One of the other questions I got was, what do you get out of the transaction? I think for me, I'm personally vested in helping smaller schools compete at a high level. So I get a lot of satisfaction in that. In this particular deal, it's so unique and creative, and it's never been done before. And deals like that get me really excited. So it's more of a passion project. I'm not here proclaiming to be an owner of a football team at this point, nor am I saying that this is where my career and future is going, although staying involved and connected to college athletics is something that I am deeply, deeply passionate about and want to be part of a solution versus just doing what I think a lot of people at smaller schools do, which is complain about what they don't have. And so thinking a little bit differently, being an active participant and trying to actually create change through real work and then connecting some dots, and also thinking differently. So the creativity around putting a deal that's never been done before, I like that stuff. It's second nature to me in business, and I guess that's one of those things that this gets me up out of bed. So anyway, that's kind of what I get out of it. There will hopefully be an opportunity to be an investor. How large, we'll see, but to be an investor, potentially sit on the board, and then be part of the ownership group that would shape and build change at a smaller school.